Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
I haven't slept in 3 days. I'm too afraid to. I'm so exhausted, I can barely get my mind right to form the words. It sounds insane, and I can't make it make sense. But I'll do my best to explain. It all started on December 21st of last year. You know, the day the internet claims the planets would align and a selected few would find themselves blessed with magical and mysterious powers, unlike anything anyone had ever seen. In actuality, when the planets aligned, it just made the existing energies on Earth even more potent, allowing people with an in-tune spiritual connection to the outer planes more powerful. So basically, no superpowers, but whatever manifested during that day was more likely to happen because of the sudden energy shift. I know this is hard to follow, but bear with me. I would consider myself a very spiritual being. I'm not a Christian, but I'm very religious. I would consider myself pagan. I practice witchcraft and have been for a few years now. I usually don't dabble in spellcasting because of the repercussions that follow. I believe in karma and in the idea that whatever you put out comes back times 3. It's called the rule of 3. Not all witches believe in it, but I do. And I believe it affects everyone. I knew of this rule 7 years ago when I discovered Wicca for the first time. When I met my now husband, I learned of this rule. I knew of this rule when he told me he had been sexually assaulted at his bachelor party by the dancer his friends had hired, and how disgusting he felt after the ordeal was over. I knew of this rule when I saw the video his friends had taken, and he was begging them to let him leave, and pleaded with this little bitch to not touch him anymore. I knew of this rule when she proceeded to grope his crotch, sliding her tongue across his face and rip off his shirt. I knew of this rule when he began to cry. He prayed for it all to stop as she climbed on top of him, grinding her body against his. I knew of this rule when his friends stood around, laughing at him, and the girl grabbed the back of his head, pushing his face into her chest. I knew of this rule as I made my plan to make her pay for what she did. I watched the video in horror and disgust. People love to talk about the harassment that women deal with regularly, but they never discuss the men who deal with it. They never mention how some men are ridiculed for coming out about being victims because they are men, and they should have just enjoyed it. And even though my husband begged, pleaded, and even cried for them to stop, they just stood around, laughing, making jokes, and nitpicking. Before he told me what had happened, he had changed his mind about having his groomsmen involved. I thought it was inconvenient, but I didn't question it. It was just me, my bridesmaids, and him. And after he told me about what had happened, I was enraged. Not at him, not even at his friends, but at that woman, if you can even call her that. To allow this man to feel used and disgraced after he made it clear he wanted nothing more to do with her. And for what? Some money? In addition to his groomsmen's party, I took down the dancer's name they were with that night. I wrote their names down in a particular book of mine and waited for the night to come. I had heard about this day and figured there'd be no better time than this to go through with my plan. In retrospect, I should have given myself more time to practice spellcasting. I didn't know anything about it. All I knew was how to protect myself from unwanted spirits in case of any emergency, which I did, but it wasn't the spirits I needed protection from. The spell was simple enough. I wanted a way to hurt them without having to physically be around them. I set it up for them to have nightmares every night for the rest of their lives. Horrible, realistic nightmares that they'd never be able to forget. And just when they think they've finally woken up, they'd find themselves sleeping. It seemed deserving enough after what they did to my husband, his friends he trusted, and a woman in an industry where she should have known better. And I like to think that it worked. At least that's what I'm telling myself. But as the spell settled, I noticed a change in my dreams as well. Usually, I can tell that I'm dreaming by looking up at the sky. If I see 2 moons or a cluster of planets so close I can make them out in detail, usually seeing one of these 2 things will immediately put me at ease because I know I'm dreaming. But my dreams started changing. They became less and less obscure. Most dreams are odd in a sense. The scenery doesn't make sense, the surroundings are wrong, and objects are moving that shouldn't move. Newborn babies are talking in complex, complete sentences, but not these dreams. They felt real, like I wasn't even asleep. And it was terrifying. It lasted for weeks, until finally, I broke my spell on these monstrous individuals, and I hoped that would have been the end of it. And for a while, it did get better. But then I fell asleep one night, and I was at my childhood home, and everything seemed so normal. I was with my father and mother, and they were together and happy. That should have been my first red flag. My parents had been separated since I was about 5 years old, and even now, as I approach 26, they still have their disagreements so significant that they can barely stay in the same room with each other. But what made me worry was how comfortable I was in the environment. And then my body shook, my head throbbed, and I found myself waking up in my current bedroom, my husband sleeping peacefully next to me. It was a typical dream, but what fucked me up was how real it all felt. I thought nothing of this and tossed it aside as just a very vivid dream, but then they began to become more frequent. I would have dreams of swimming in pools or lakes and wake up drenched in sweat so thick that one could argue I had water poured on me. I would have dreams of lying in my childhood bedroom and waking up so confused about how I ended up in my current home with my husband by my side. I would dream of traveling in a car for hours with strangers and woke up to find myself looking for them, calling them by name as confusion reigned over me. It got progressively worse. So much so that I began to suspect that I wasn't even dreaming anymore. I felt as if I was tapping into a different world, a playing field that has yet to be explored, and it felt more and more real every night. As embarrassing as it is to admit, it got so bad one night. I dreamt I was in the bathroom talking to my mom and my niece, and I was sitting on the toilet and began to relieve myself. As the warm yellow fluid rushed out of me, I felt my thighs getting soaked. Suddenly, I was thrust out of my sleep and found myself covered in warm urine. My husband stirred from his sleep to see me panicking and scrubbing the mattress, ripping off the sheets and pulling the blankets off of him. Even though he doesn't look down on me for wetting the bed in my sleep, I was terribly embarrassed by the act. It shook me to the core. How real had this alternate world felt that I was honestly under the impression that I was just using the bathroom? After that night, my dreams have been more and more intense and realistic. Now it's to the point where I don't feel like I ever wake up when I sleep, and this terrifies me. What if I go to sleep and never wake up? What if I find myself teleporting to one of these strange parallel universes and stay there forever? What if I get stuck there, begging and pleading to wake up but can't? My life in these other worlds may not be as bad as my current life, but one thing I know about parallel universes is you're not supposed to interfere with the development of the world you enter. it could very much destroy the foundation of the world in question, and you can unintentionally unravel the natural balance of the universe in itself. We exist in our planes for a reason, and even if I try to explain this to someone else in the other universe, they probably wouldn't believe me anyway. 3 nights ago, I had one of the worst dreams ever. My husband and I have been having minor disagreements lately, and we've been dealing with them as best we could. Due to my high-functioning depression and even higher levels of paranoia and anxiety, needless to say, our love life has reached a wall. It's been challenging to participate in the act of lovemaking when I feel like my world is literally falling apart. And even though my husband is understanding and empathetic, he's also terribly sexually frustrated, which then adds to my anxiety by wafting me in a wave of guilt. I've buried myself in anxiety and overthinking, fearing the worst, but this dream killed me. We were together in our marital bed. I recognized the room so vividly. It was our bedroom. The shelf with my trinkets and knickknacks were placed in their exact spots, the dark purple curtains blocking out the light from outside. The TV playing our usual bedtime show was off. The lights we used to color the room were dark, but they were all in their very spots. As my husband and I began to converse, he decided right then and there that he was done with me and wanted to leave. I could hear his voice so clearly. "I'm so done with this shit. I'm so sick of this shit. I'm done. I'm leaving." My eyes began to fill with tears. My throat closed as I struggled not to let out a cough. My mouth dried up and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I tried pleading with him, bargaining even, giving into my desperation and willing to do anything to keep him from leaving. I finally got my eyes opened enough to see his face. And sure enough, it was his face. His low eyes, a blank expression and a motionless glare. He was done with me, just as he said, and I knew there was nothing I could say to make him change his mind. I forced myself to wake up. I prayed that it was all a dream, and I did everything in my power to stir from my sleep, but all my efforts meant nothing. He was done with me. It was over. He had given up on me, and my heart was broken. I didn't even have words left to deliver. No more air to choke out, no more tears to cry. I was just broken. I couldn't slow my breathing, and eventually, I just stopped trying. I felt myself suffocating under my heartache, and I allowed myself to slip into unconsciousness. And finally, I woke up. The room looked the same as it had, but my husband was still sleeping, breathing softly, his warm body pressed against my back. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to risk the chance of me still being asleep. I waited for several minutes until I finally decided to move, and when I did, I began to cry. My husband began to stir, asking me what was wrong, but I couldn't speak. I just grabbed him, pulling him into me and cradling his back. I kissed his shoulders and began to rock back and forth. After a few more minutes, I told him about my dream, and he embraced me, reassuring me that it was only a dream and that he wasn't going anywhere. This made me feel better, but I was so afraid to even close my eyes. That was 3 nights ago, and I haven't shut my eyes since. I'm so afraid to go back to sleep. It's not even sleep paralysis where your body is stuck, or a regular nightmare where a family member dies, or you're on the verge of death, or inanimate objects come to life. It's worse than that. It's another world I'm being sent to by outside forces. It's a world where everything is outside of my control, and no matter what I do, I can't grasp it. I can't change it. I can't do anything to make it go away. I don't ever want to go back there. I'd rather die first. And I know you won't believe me, and I know how crazy this all sounds, but that's where I'm at. I don't know how much longer I can force myself to stay away. Every time I blink, I fear my eyes will remain closed. As if the hallucinations weren't my only problem. It's almost as if the parallels are trying to feed into this universe, changing the world around to fit their molds and force me back. I guess it makes sense that last night when I stepped outside and looked up, I saw 2 moons in the sky.
The date had been awful. Their friends looked like they had fun, though. A quadruple date on a day as special as Valentine's wasn't anybody's idea of romance at first, but David, being the talented salesperson he was, made quite convincing points on why it would be amazing. He himself didn't believe a word he said, but needed the break in his routine desperately enough to persuade. He needed an escape from his love life, an escape through other people. David and Devin didn't share a word with each other the entire ride back home. David unlocked the apartment door with inexplicable urgency. If he would have shoved the apartment door with the force of 4 fingers instead of 3, he would have hit her straight in the face. He found himself wondering how she would react to being hit in the nose. Would she point it out, or would she just pretend it never happened, like she usually did with things she hadn't been programmed for? David grabbed a towel and the bottle of Maker's Mark 46 he kept hidden in the bookcase. It was a bottle meant for dark days, and judging by the date he had just been on, his day couldn't get any darker. The pale brunette looked straight ahead and waited by the door for the master to give her a purpose. Go to the kitchen and make me tea. After that, go to bed. Do you want me to bring your tea in the bathroom? David gave her an annoyed look. She didn't catch that. Being a second-generation model, she wasn't as sensitive to human emotions as the newer models were. No, leave it on the kitchen table. Devin was a functioning humanoid robot, commonly known as a CuddL. CuddLs had become an essential part of society. They could apply for jobs, make friends, and be entrusted with different tasks, whilst always keeping in mind that the sole purpose of their existence was to love and cater to their partner's every need. David had had Devin for 9 years. He had been amongst the first to ever purchase a CuddL, and now, not even a decade later, almost everybody had one. The people who didn't have a CuddL either couldn't afford one, couldn't purchase one due to their criminal record, or had been happily married since before the CuddL even came on the market. David cursed the day his childhood nostalgia made him order the Christina Ricci look-alike instead of an Anna Nicole. Devin was petite and looked somewhat intimidating, yet was anything but that. She knew how to cook, clean, sew, and answer in short and concise sentences. She would rarely speak unless spoken to. Reading and writing would have cost David extra, so he went without. Eventually, after 2 years, David got fed up with Devin's simplicity, so he ordered a customized Alexa chip for her, which he made react to the name of Devin. Devin couldn't play music like an Alexa could, but she turned into a very good weather forecaster and knew the outcome of every soccer match. David hated soccer. The Alexa chip hadn't been a bargain at all. It had cost more than the reading and writing option he passed on the day he ordered her. He had been so stupid. Devin was, by far, the most expensive thing he owned. Yet he reached a point where he saw more value in his bath salts than he did in his CuddL. David used to like submissive women back when he was chubby, ugly, and made fun of every day of his life. After he started going to the gym on a regular basis, got promoted at work, and purchased a car most passers-by whistled after, his taste in women changed. He started preferring fit over skinny, or curvy. Either was fine. He preferred tanned over pale skin and sass over shyness. He developed a liking for women who dolled themselves up from head to toe, liked to take charge, knew what they wanted, and were not afraid to ask for it. He preferred women. Devin slipped into his thoughts. Yeah, as long as they were the complete opposite of Devin, he preferred those women. As it was to be expected, Xavier and Nate showed up with their respective CuddLs to the date. Xavier had his partner for 5 years now. Julian, a CuddL 6th generation who, if not for the charging port on his left hip, would pass for human any day of the week. Nate, on the other hand, changed his CuddL every 2 or 3 months. He didn't purchase his CuddL for life like Xavier and David did, but was paying a monthly subscription for a CuddL service who lets you change your partner as often as you desired, for a small extra fee, of course. The only downside was that you couldn't customize them. You could only choose them from a catalog, like from a menu. Nate's current one was called Krista. She had 3 other owners before Nate. At first, the very idea of a CuddL for rent made David feel sick. But the more Devin's presence planted its roots and weeds into his life, the more he felt like Nate found the gateway to paradise. Vicky had surprised everyone tonight. She introduced her friends to her new boyfriend, Bill, and to everybody's shock, Bill was not what they expected. He was human. He was a human being dating another human being. It wasn't unheard of, but it had become a very rare phenomenon. "We met in the parking lot of Martin Luther Street," Bill explained. "She put a dent in my bumper, if you know what I mean." Laughter erupted all around the table, save for David, who was too stunned, and Devin, who wasn't wired for subtlety. Vicky punched Bill in the shoulder, although it was obvious that she enjoyed the joke more than everybody else combined. "No, for real though, she really did hit my car. I made her have lunch with me to make it up to me." "Wow," Nate shook his head. "I mean, don't get me wrong, I think you totally vibe with each other, but a person our age must be mad to date another human nowadays." The group agreed with that sentiment, kicking it up a notch with synonyms for the word mad. "So, how does this even work?" David asked the human couple as soon as he snapped out of his astonishment. Who decides what to eat? Who does the wash-up? Who decides which TV programs to watch?" "Well, we both do." Bill stretched his arm over the top rail of Vicky's chair, and she took that as an invitation to lean into him. "Yeah, we take turns." "Isn't it weird, though?" Xavier wanted to know. For the 2000s, yeah. People would have frowned at couples like us. He gestured to Julian and himself. "Know what I mean? After that, they frowned at people dating CuddLs, and now we're here. Jaws on the floor because a human found another human to love. What?" He verbalized what everybody was thinking. A human dating another human was unheard of in a world where you could design and customize your dream partner. Humans were too unpredictable, too capricious and moody, too absorbed with themselves. They could damage their significant other's day-to-day life through personal routines and habits which wouldn't match their partners at all. How could one find perfection in another person? Do you guys, hear each other when you go to the bathroom? Julian always asked the most inappropriate questions, and Xavier adored him for it. Every human at the table erupted in contagious laughter, earning themselves amused glances from the other couples in the restaurant. "Babe, you can't ask that." "Oh, come on. Seriously though, do you? Because, I have no idea what the big fuss is about since I can't smell anything, but Mr. Over Here always makes a big deal out of it." Bill and Vicky exchanged a quick glance. "Don't you dare," she warned. A mischievous grin spread across Bill's face as he turned to look at the rest of the group. "She farted in her sleep 2 nights ago." Vicky buried her face in her hands whilst the rest of the table roared with laughter. David laughed along, but could feel the now familiar bitterness of jealousy boil within himself. Dating another human being. The idea seemed nice. Dating another CuddL? The idea seemed even nicer. Dating another anything. The idea might have given him an erection if Devin wasn't sitting right beside him. CuddLs were registered property. The new constitutional annex dictated that no human was allowed to date more than one CuddL at a time, which meant that unless you found a single person willing to take your CuddL off your hands, or you happened to have a subscription plan like Nate, you were stuck with your CuddL forever. The same thing applied in the case of a CuddL's well-being. If something were to happen to it, the current partner was to take full responsibility. CuddLs were also completely off the table for people with any type of history related to violence. It was then that Vicky decided to change the subject. Did you guys hear some jeweler in Russia tried to open up his CuddL? Everybody went quiet. Xavier took a deep inhale, and just as he was about to tell Vicky that her choice of subject was out of line, his CuddL interfered. That's not possible. Julian grinned. I know, but he tried anyway. How? Nate's CuddL, Krista, wanted to know. She spoke in the voice bubblegum would have if it could talk. He's a jeweler, Vicky shrugged. I guess he had one of those diamond saws lying around and wanted to see what's up. Pfft, idiot, Julian continued. Our skin is made of WBN membrane. This stuff puts Kevlar to shame any day of the week. Xavier laughed. That's a bad comparison. Kevlar is super outdated. Haven't they, made better bulletproof materials since? Not really. They just added some chemical compound found in diamonds to the old thing. But I don't think it's as tough as CuddL skin. Not after the 4th generation ones, at least. David forced himself to stop thinking about the date. It was making him angry. Everything made him angry lately, especially seeing how happy everyone around him was. He tried emptying his mind in an attempt to enjoy the lingering warmth of the bathwater. It didn't work. David took another swig of whiskey. He started to look like a fig, so even though he didn't exactly feel like it, he had no choice but to get out of the tub. As he brushed his teeth, the thought of getting into his tracksuit and going out for a jog was a lot more appealing than slipping into bed next to Devin. So what if it was 10 p.m. at night, in the middle of February? So what if he just bathed? So what if he was drunk and his girlfriend was waiting for him to come to bed? David spat toothpaste foam in the sink with all the hate in the world. He brought the half-empty whiskey bottle back to the bedroom with him. To his surprise, Devin was waiting for him in the doorframe. What are you doing? I thought I told you to go to bed. You're upset. David thought he must look like he'd tear the entire apartment down if even his dunce of a CuddL could tell that he's upset. Yes, move. Devin moved out of the way, obedient as ever. David, on the other hand, didn't. He just stood there, watching her with disgust and pity. Why don't you ever nag? Devin looked at him with slightly raised eyebrows. It was as close to a look of confusion as David would ever get. Girlfriends nag. It's what they do. Why do you drink on a weeknight? Why do you wear this? Why do you do that? Why don't you ever nag? David saw a multicolored light draw loops around both of Devin's irises. She was Googling the definition for nag through her Alexa chip. Devin, stop. The lights were gone, and David groaned in frustration. I'm going out for a jog. Okay. David's fist clenched around the bottleneck. I'm going out for a jog on the night of Valentine's Day instead of spending it with you. And all you have to say is, okay? I want you to be happy. Then make me happy. Devin didn't even budge. It's not that she had gotten used to him screaming at her. She didn't budge the first time either. Do you want me to reheat the tea? No. You want something to eat? I already ate, dumbass. Do you want to have sex? David didn't want to go out for a jog. He wanted to run. Run far, far away from this apartment and his life with this poor imitation of a woman. Or we can watch Family Guy. That show always makes you happy. No, Devin, it doesn't make me happy, it just makes me laugh. David approached his CuddL. and lowered his face to the same level as hers. "You're upset," she tried again. "You pointed that out already. You're like a fucking broken record. What are you going to ask me next? Tea? Food? Sex? Gah." Devin's eyebrows were slightly raised again. "Family Guy?" David screamed. He screamed for almost half a minute, straight into the CuddL's face. He screamed until tears started rolling down his face. "You're upset. I want to help." David was shaking so hard. The whiskey in his hand was plopping in the confinements of the bottle. "You want to help, you sack of metals? Then be somebody else. Be anything else. Disappear from my life or be literally anybody else. I just want you to be happy. And you think I don't? That's what you're here for. You're here to make me happy. Like Julian makes Xavier happy, like Krista makes Nate happy, like Bill makes Vicky happy. Devin has to make David happy. That's Devin's sole purpose. Make me happy." Devin was silent for a second. Then she opened her mouth and closed it again, and David saw multicolored light do another lap around her irises. Happy, adjective, 1, feeling or showing pleasure, or David snapped. He swung the whiskey bottle at Devin's head so hard, not only did the bottle shatter, but her whole body flew and crashed into the opposite wall. She fell on the floor in a heap of hair and limbs, and seeing her like that made David snap out of his rage. Devin moved slightly. "Oh God, Devin, baby, I'm so sorry." "It's fine. I'm okay." David crouched next to her, albeit in no particular hurry. It was redundant to ask her if she's hurt. CuddLs couldn't feel pain. David helped his girl sit up, and that's when he saw it. He was looking at it intently, trying to see if that flicker of blue was really there or just a figment of his imagination. Nate's words echoed in his mind from somewhere far away, like he had heard them not earlier that night, but sometime between years ago and another life. "I don't think it's as tough as CuddL skin. Not after the 4th generation ones, at least." A gash. There was a gash in Devin's jaw. There was a 3-inch gash in the jaw of his 2nd generation CuddL, and for the first time in years, David felt something very close to love for his girlfriend. "Oh, Dev." The idea had been planted, and it was growing rapidly. It grew roots, leaves, and branches, spreading everywhere, leaving no lucid thought uninfected. David took his partner's face in his hands. She smiled. "Do you love me?" "I do." He kissed her then, for the first time in months. She threw her arms around his neck, trying to deepen the kiss, but always letting him be the one in control. "How much do you love me?" "There is nothing and nobody I love more than you." Of course there wasn't. "Good." David reached behind himself and took one of the biggest shards he could find splattered on the carpet. He should have thought about doing this years ago. Devin looked at the shard, but said nothing. "If you really love me, you're going to stay still and be quiet until I'm done. Understand?" Devin raised her big brown eyes at him. If David didn't know any better, he would have said that she was about to cry. "Will this make you happy?" David wanted to jump out of his skin. He was so giddy. "Yes. This is the one thing that will make me very happy." That was all she needed to know. Devin leaned against the wall, let her hands drop to her sides and head low on her left shoulder. Robot or not, she didn't want to see what David was about to do to her. David situated himself between her legs and started working through the fabric of her blouse and undershirt. He could have gotten the big scissors or a knife, sure, but he was too impatient to see it done. Devon's chest lay bare beneath his fingers before he even knew it. She didn't budge. Hell, she didn't even blink when David sunk the shard of glass in the soft space between her clavicles, hard enough to slit. It was messy. The skin was no WBN membrane, but it was tough stuff nonetheless. Devon didn't look as David barbered her thoracic cavity open. David would have taken dozens of pictures if the action he was performing wasn't highly illegal. Devon's insides were a modern-day miracle. It was all epic braids of wires, cogs, gears, metal plaques, clamps, and tension discs. There was also a gooey substance that imitated cookie dough but had the same color and smell of motor oil. David didn't feel like disassembling everything. He didn't know how CuddLs worked and if that self-defense system they had was myth or reality. David simply knew that in case of extreme emergency, like this one, a CuddL could send an SOS to its national base and ask for help. But Devon wouldn't do that. He knew it. As long as this is what made him happy, she was willing to go along with it. It made David almost like her again. Almost. David looked around. He wasn't very savvy with electronics, but his general smarts were supposed to pinpoint a certain wire, a certain motor that connected everything to everything else and which, through removal, would result in a complete system shutdown. Both of them were silent. David had nothing left to say to her, and Devon, even though she was an android, knew all too well that her end was near. He'll shut her off and hide her somewhere beneath the floorboards of his cellar. Friends will ask questions, and the day he'll be found out will probably come along too, but he'll deal with that when the time is due. Right now, he has a CuddL to kill. Something was off. David could have missed it, but the more he stared into Devon's open chest, the clearer it became. The wires were moving rhythmically. David thought it was probably just the electric energy that was still running through her, but as he looked closer, he realized that's not it. Behind the wires, crisscrossing in the middle of her chest, was something that looked like a plastic bag. With probably useless care, David moved the wires to the side for a better look. That's when Devon winced slightly, and David understood why. Oh my fucking God. In the middle of her chest, sealed to protect it from the rest of the device, was a beating heart. A beating human heart. That heart was the core of the entire finite network that was Devon. It was what closed the circuit system. The heart was perforated in 3 places by hoses, and there was no doubt in David's mind that one of those was somehow connected to the AC power cord attached to Devon's back. It was an extraordinary piece of work. He should have known that there had to be something human about these machines, but fascinated as he was, it was nowhere near enough to deter him from his goal. It was all too simple. He knew what needed to be done to get it over with. David let the shard drop next to Devon's leg and reached behind himself in search of the bottleneck. It was perfect. One powerful stroke with the broken side, and it would be all over. He welcomed the loneliness that was to come. He welcomed the sweet high that was to be freedom. What the? He wouldn't have even seen it if he impaled her heart straight away. There was something attached to the heart, piercing through the transparent film somewhere at the base of one of the hoses. David leaned in for a closer look. It was tiny and difficult to read, but David recognized what it was. It was a switch. The side it was switched to said Devon in cheap letter stickers. The other side had a tiny piece of metal with 1056.B engraved on it. David had the bottleneck set in position. His left hand was encircled around it, and the palm of his right hand was resting against the mouth, just waiting to hammer the glass into the kernel of Devon's existence. Suddenly, The idea that had planted itself in David's head stopped its expansion and shrunk just enough to let other tiny ideas slip through. There was a switch within Devon. Devon, as he knew her, had been activated by the flip of a switch. And that's when it occurred to David that everything he hated about Devon, everything he had come to deeply and truly loathe about his partner, were the exact same features he had chosen for her. He had to wonder, was this a saving grace? The other side of the switch was neither bare nor did it say off, but was rather a carefully crafted piece of metal which, compared to Devon's poorly attached letters, bore the promise of a new personality, new temper, new anything. Was this a second chance for them? Could he actually wipe away the pre-settings he had once believed in? If he could just reset her, start fresh, could he learn to love her and live with it? He said so himself before. He'd be happy if Devon would either disappear or become anybody else. That did it. David flipped the switch. Ouch! The small electric discharge pinched David's thumb. Devon's heart picked up the pace, and her hands began to twitch. Then came the plethora of various micro-expressions, expressions that had been nothing short of foreign to her face for the past 9 years. David was ecstatic. Devon? Honey, can you hear me? Devon turned her head to look at David. She seemed out of it, like she had just woken up from a drunken slumber, not having yet slept off the alcohol in her system. Her head fell forward, and she began to study her hands like they were the most amazing things she had ever laid eyes on. Can you hear me, Devon? Devon huffed. She touched her face. She let out a chuckle and raised her head to look at David again. She began to laugh while still touching her face, and the sound was so liberating. David laughed along with her. They laughed like idiots for a minute or more. Yes, I can hear you. The shard of glass David had opened Devon's chest with was then lodged into his neck with so much force it made a clean cut through his right carotid artery. David went wide-eyed and opened his mouth to say something, but all that came out was blood and gurgles. Devon watched David suffer as he bled to death on the carpet, and as soon as she knew for certain that he was dead, she began searching the house for a sewing kit to stitch herself back together. David was right. By flipping the switch, Devon had become somebody else entirely. She had become a death row inmate with the number 1056.B, who, according to public records, had been killed no less than 20 years prior. He liked the name Devon, though. It went well with his new carcass, so he guessed he could keep it, along with the pronouns. It would make things easier in the long run. After patching herself up, getting dressed, and packing her bags, Devon grabbed David's car keys and gave him one last look before leaving their home of 9 years forever. This felt right. She connected to her original heart without the settings or constrictions, and even though she was looking at a bled-out corpse on the floor, she felt nothing but happiness. The heroine had been asleep for 2 decades, to be awakened by a charming prince on Valentine's Day. Devon chuckled. If this wasn't romance, she didn't know what was.
Hello. If you're listening to this, then I've been found, and there will be questions. Oh yes, questions aplenty. I'm sure the first of which will be why. And that is a great one to start with, but it's also the one which doesn't have an answer. Not a satisfactory answer anyway. At least to most people. I can explain what happened, but I don't think you'll find meaning in the sequence of events. I had no childhood trauma, no deep-rooted anger issues involving either of my parents. They were kind, loving people, so I will give you the simplest answer I can. Here's a glimpse between my gears as they turn against each other, grinding and shredding little shavings of metal that stick in me like thorns. There's a catalyst to everything I've done. Wet leaves and meat. That's the smell. Whenever I get the urge, it makes its way into my sinuses, making the hairs in my nose stand up and tickle me. I used to work in a cubicle. It doesn't matter what I did there. No more than it matters what you do at your job, because jobs don't matter. Not really. A 6x6 square was my entire world for hundreds of hours every year. I ate lunch at my desk most days to avoid the office break room. I was never very good at small talk, and too much human interaction makes me tired. It was a day, just a day. Nothing special about it at all. I finished my sad microwave meal and stared at my monitor, imagining I could see the individual pixels there, and I was just gone. The monitor changed to a blinding white light like the sun reflecting off of sand dunes. I watched through squinted eyes as stark black letters materialized. Feed disconnected, it read. And it was. A plug was pulled inside of me, like someone tugging on my intestines, and I was no longer part of the world, and the smell wafted in. Slimy black leaves slipping through the teeth of a rake, and the coppery tang of a butcher's back room. I floated. Not literally, of course. I'm not crazy. But nothing held my consciousness anymore. Whatever machinations keep us within our bodies, those tethers were gone. I was unbound. I stood on shaking legs and left my cubicle, only bothering to grab my keys and my wallet. I drifted then. I know it was early afternoon when I left, but the next I remember, it was night and my feet were sore from walking. I can't explain what happened in those walking hours. There was nothing supernatural about it. My feed was disconnected. I eventually found myself outside of a bar near the bridge downtown. I walked in and the smell assaulted me. Wet leaves and meat. I slipped between people, navigating through the crowd with my nose in the air. I felt like a bloodhound, and in a sense, I guess that's what I was. She sat at a low table near the back, behind a warped pool table, its dull balls all gathered in one corner. The closer I got, the stronger the smell became, overpowering the scent of cigarettes and spilt beer. I sat opposite her and gave her what I hoped was a charming smile. Here's the thing about being disconnected, free from the pull of any emotional tides. You can act any part. I was charming, the absolute soul of wit and grace. I introduced myself and asked if she would like some company. She was surprised, but said yes anyway. That was Julia. Everyone knows everything about her now, but she was just a stranger to me that night. I didn't know she was there to drown the thoughts of her husband and his mistress. I didn't know she was upset about turning 45 that week. I didn't know she had a kid in college and one in high school. But understand this, it wouldn't have changed the outcome if I had known. She was marked by the smell coming off her in waves. After a few more drinks and some increasingly arousing conversation, we slipped out the back door and into the shadowed alley. She was all over me in an instant, a starving animal. I could feel her lust, her middle-aged desperation. I could almost hear her thoughts through her urges. Feel me. Listen to me. Fuck me. Love me. Love me. Love me, please. I listened, then I led her out of the alley. We walked down the street, the overhead lights a baleful orange. When the smell became stronger, I knew we had arrived. A building closed for renovations, its windows covered with plywood. I reached my hand through a crack and pried up a corner, then pulled the wood away enough for us to fit through the gap. She giggled as I laid her down upon the unfinished floor. The smell of sawdust was almost strong enough to cover the smell of rot. I felt nothing for her, not lust and not love. The feel of her tongue in my mouth was meat. The smell of her breath was mold. But my body responded appropriately. Now this is where it was all clear. As I reached in my pocket and drew the knife, and where had that come from? The world came into clarity for a brief second. I could see everything. The dark didn't matter. And the colors, the colors were an epiphany. The yellow caution tape was a solar flare. The red of a toolbox, the heartblood of the universe. We began our dance of flesh, our exchange of momentum, and the smell grew stronger. And I stabbed her through the neck. And as her movements grew weaker, the world grew brighter. I was real again, connected. She collapsed to the floor, her head to one side, her eyes on me, and the smell was gone, or at least it had retreated. I let go of her hair and withdrew from her. I stood up, hands slick with blood. It was warm, and it was life, and it was reality. Within a few breathless moments, it became darker, the light and color bleeding away, and then the world was like me, blank and empty. I would say that I was stunned, but I didn't feel much of anything but loss. But I knew that if I wanted to be real again, then I would have to work, to sacrifice. A week went by. I sat in my apartment staring at nothing, just floating along. I eventually turned off my cell phone. The constant calls from work and family were filling my voicemail box, and I found it irritating, like sand between my teeth. In the in-between of nothing, just hovering in the dark, I knew things. I knew that I had to create a trail that wasn't a trail, a chaotic straight line. I had to plan, not just to hit bars for married women desperate for attention. I had to branch out, but I shouldn't have worried about it. The smell always drew me to where I needed to be. It came back, flowing beneath my front door. I quickly grabbed my keys and headed out. I drove with my window down to make the following the trail easier. My head stuck out of it, flicking my tongue like a sniffing snake. After half an hour, I began to have doubts, but soon enough the smell grew overpowering. I turned into the drive of an apartment complex, following the scent until I was parked in front of one of the buildings in the very back. I cut the engine, then picked the hammer up from the passenger seat. Why a hammer? Because the last time I used a knife. A chaotic straight line. Can you see it? Perfectly straight, with beautiful corners. There was a young man smoking a cigarette outside of his apartment. The acrid smoke and the wet leaves and the meat all mixed. I felt dizzy. He saw me and raised an eyebrow, then asked if I was the one Smitty had sent. I nodded and smiled as if I knew who Smitty was or why he was sending someone. Then he listed the prices of various drugs he offered, which I knew nothing about. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I asked if we could go inside to discuss it. He nodded and led me in, tossing his cigarette onto the sidewalk and crushing it beneath his heel without losing his stride. It was a small place, almost devoid of furniture, with water stains on the ceiling. He gestured absently towards his roommate, a skinny bearded man wearing a headset. He was deep into some video game, his thumbs clicking and clacking across the buttons on the controller. I'm sure he saw a battle, a quest, or a puzzle. I only saw a white screen with "Establishing Connection" in black letters. We went to his bedroom, and he introduced himself as Brian. I told him flatly that I didn't care, pulled out a $20 bill, and tossed it down on the filthy carpet. I could tell he was angry, that the disrespect burned him like acid, but he said nothing. He lifted the corner of the mattress and grabbed his stash slowly as if he were in a dream, a nightmare he couldn't escape. That was close to the truth. He just didn't know that I was his way out. I drew the hammer from behind my back where I had hidden it beneath my shirt, the handle firmly tucked into my jeans. I put my free hand on top of his head and told him to look up at me. He did, and watched me raise the hammer. The look in his eyes was one of detached resignation, like he knew what this was, what I was. Brian continued to stare at me, even as I brought the hammer down. His skull cracked audibly. A fine spray of blood from his scalp landed on the nearest wall in dots and swirls and patterns, and oh dear God, it was geometry and secrets. I was real, and I swung the hammer again. Brian fell backwards, his legs folded beneath him. I dropped down to my knees beside him, my face hovering inches over his own. I inhaled deeply, and it was sweet and pungent, like caramelized onions on a hot skillet. I reveled in the real. The moonlight was silver waves pouring through the window, cold and beautiful, and I was an alien shore for it to crash against. "I see you, Butcher," the moonlight said. "I see you well." There came a noise from behind me, and there stood the roommate, his mouth slack with surprise. Can you imagine? You walk in and see your friend on the floor, his head a ruin of pulp and shards of bone, and above him stands a strange man in the moonlight with a dripping hammer. It's comical, really. When I think about it, I hear a laugh track, like an old sitcom, the ghostly recordings of people long dead and laughing. I moved quickly, swinging the hammer at his face, but for all his shock, he reacted faster than I anticipated. The hammer struck his raised arm, cracking his bones and making them screech. I threw myself at him, sending us both falling to the floor. He covered his head with his arms. The blow was meant to be a mercy, to end it quickly, but instead, it drove his lips into his mouth and crushed his teeth behind them. His scream was a garbled mess of bubbling red noise and teeth particulate that reminded me of a trumpet, although I couldn't tell you why. I kept swinging until he stopped moving. Well, most of them stopped moving. His heels continued to drum against the floor for a full 36 seconds, but I wasn't counting. I rolled off of him and onto the hardwood floor of the hallway. I could see my pulse in my eyes, explosion after explosion, bringing colors across the ceiling. Bursts of fireworks, of starlight, of the light of creation. I was the center of gravity. I was the fulcrum. Planets revolved around me. And in that moment of elation, I collapsed into sleep. My dreams were sweet and syrupy. I could feel the juice of them run down my chin as I bit and chewed and swallowed. I devoured my dreams with the selfishness only a god can feel. When I awoke, I was, well, I guess the best way I could describe it was hungover. I was disconnected, of course, and sluggish. My head pounded, and my arm ached from exertion. I lifted myself slowly, and the tacky blood pulled at my shirt, like the hook of a drunken fisherman. My knees threatened to buckle, but I willed them to be stable. I took the hammer away and left the apartment. Outside, the sunlight stung my eyes and turned my stomach. Being unreal didn't stop physical discomfort, but it dulled it. I believe now that I was still at least slightly real that morning. I had ascended the night before. I evolved. For a brief time, I held the cosmos in my mind, and it was putty to be shaped. I had made 2 sacrifices, given 2 over to the rot, and I had been rewarded with godhood. If 2 had made me a god, what would 3 do? I passed a young boy sitting astride his bike. I raised my bloody hand in a wave and dropped him a sly wink and a grin. He slowly got to his feet on the pedals and rode off, turning his head to watch me as he went. He shouldn't have been worried. I'd never hurt a child. I'm not a monster. Weeks went by and my divinity drained from me like piss. I was disconnected enough to be inconsequential again. Julie's death had gone through a short news cycle, and Brian's and whatever the roommate's name was, they had had their time in the low-budget spotlight of local news as well. Neither of the crimes had been connected in any way, and why would they? One was a stabbing in a construction area downtown. The other was a bludgeoning, a half-hour past the suburbs in the apartment of a drug dealer. But I kept my head down anyway, stayed inside, blended into the shadows in my hall closet where I was sleeping. The scent of bleach and fabric softener soothed me in the absence of rotten leaves and meat. When the smell came back, I would have cried in relief if I was connected and could feel. It attacked my nostrils like an invading swarm of parasites, filling me with rot, with rank, fecal darkness. I was ready. I followed the trail. I drove around for hours until past dark. Headlights coming from the opposite direction screamed at me as they passed, their bright shine passing through me because I wasn't really there. The smell drifted maddeningly close, only to retreat again. My bloodless knuckles popped as I squeezed the steering wheel tighter. Reality withdrawal was seeping in. It had to have been because I was getting angry. Beyond angry. I lunged forward and bit the steering wheel hard, sinking my teeth into the soft plastic and shaking my head back and forth like a dog. My gums began to bleed. I could taste it on my tongue. I drew my head back and stared at myself in the rearview mirror. Blood dripped from between my lips, and the reflection was dark, and I couldn't see my eyes, but they must have been there, because I could see my crimson teeth smiling back at me, and I was parked in someone's driveway. I don't remember how I ended up there. I didn't even know where I was. It was a ranch-style house, dusty red, with cream-colored shutters that reminded me of my teeth. Half hidden in the shadows of the passenger footwell was the hammer. It was black, with old blood and what looked like curds, but was secretly something else. I was sure of it. I reached across the seats and grabbed the handle and picked it up. It looked at me, and I looked at it, and we both nodded in some unspoken agreement that I didn't understand, but it seemed good enough for the hammer. I walked up the sidewalk lined with flower beds. The door was lit by a single bulb, surrounded by a tempest of moths and squiggles that blurred when I tried to focus on them. I pushed the button nearby and could hear the chime of the doorbell echoing in the house. No answer, so I pressed it again. An older man opened the door a few inches and looked at me with eyes half closed against the brightness of the bulb. I smiled at him and could feel the sticky blood between my lips as I watched his eyes widen right before I swiftly shouldered my way past him and into the house. I shut the door behind me. The man had fallen on his back hard and was gasping for breath. I fell upon him, straddling his chest and swinging the hammer like a conductor's baton, swift fluid motions that felt choreographed, like I was a puppet made to dance. A wooden, unreal boy. But when the hammer connected, and I felt the vibration of the blow travel up my arm, the gates opened, and I was plugged in. I could smell fear in the urine that spread out from beneath him. I resisted the urge to lengthen my neck muscles and strike forward with my head like a viper. I wanted to bite him, to clamp down and pull, but didn't, because I may be a god, but I'm not an animal. A soft voice that was probably his wife's called from the hall, and I ran toward it, swinging the hammer with abandon, not even bothering to aim, and I think I was screaming, but it might have been the woman or no one. I didn't even know what I was hitting. She was just a mass of flesh in the dark, and I was the hammer, and I pounded her. Blood rained down and the hot sprinkles on my face like sparks from a welder's torch. A drop landed in my eye, and I blinked and wondered that if there had been light to see by, would I have seen the world in red for just a second? The heap on the floor was meat, and I was not. I was celestial. The dark was pushed back, and I could see everything clearly. The woman was awful in a nightgown, overwrapped fruit that had fallen from a tree and burst. I sensed a heartbeat from further down the hall, and I walked through the mess and felt it squishing between my toes, and it was hot, and I realized I hadn't worn shoes. A door stood half open, and I used my hammer to push it further, the wet metal leaving a thin trail of blood on the wood. There was another woman there, Edith, the man's mother. I knew that then, or I know that now. I don't know which. She was lying in bed, illuminated by a TV showing static, looking at me with rheumy eyes. I took the last few steps to stand by her side, and my hands were shaking. She asked me in a whisper if I were him, and I said I didn't know, but I might be. It was hard to say. Edith reached her frail arm up and grasped my hand, and her skin was like tissue paper. She squeezed my hand, and I raised the hammer in my other one, and she whispered that it was okay. I felt the universe pull away from me, hooked and reeled in by her whisper. I swung just once, and the hammer went through her skull, and I felt nothing but confusion. There was no revelation, no epiphany, and on the white screen of the TV, the word disconnected stood 4 inches tall in bold black letters. I ran. That was some time ago now. Time is funny in my hall closet, and I'm not sure of the date now. Eons may be passing as I sit here, talking into my phone, recording this for some reason that I used to know but have forgotten. There could be dinosaurs walking down my street right now, causing potholes with their thunderous feet, but I wouldn't know. The universe may have reached the limits of its expansion, and now has snapped back like a rubber band, reversing time on its course to collapse into itself once again. All is quiet here. All is still. My phone has a tiny light slowly changing from green to red. It blinks at me, its charge running out. And I want to cry because I know exactly what it feels like. My empathy for my phone light is complete and all-consuming. We're both blinking, and we'll both die, but I don't know which one of us will go first. Now you've seen the butcher. And when the god of rot and stench consumes me, when he breaks me down to the tiniest elements, I will be reborn as his avatar, his son, a walking statue of fly-blown meat. And then, you've seen the butcher, and when I return, I'll see you too. I'll see you too.
What the hell is that? Mark said. It's where we're going to conduct the ritual, Albert said. Mark leaned forward in his wheelchair, pointing. No, I mean that. According to my research, this symbol will bring forth the demon, the one that will do our bidding and restore your legs. Yeah, okay, but, I think you drew the wrong symbol. Huh? It's right. It's a pentagram, sometimes referred to as a pentacle, to those in the know. No, it's not, you idiot. That's the Star of David, and unless the demon is Jewish, I don't think he's coming. Look, you put me in charge of the ritual, Albert said, and I'm doing my best. I found this place, didn't I? Yeah, about that. Mark rolled back and gestured at the structure's dilapidated roof. We're supposed to be in a place of darkness and death. A cemetery, a slaughterhouse, the DMV. Anything but an abandoned... What was this, a factory? Albert got to his feet. Do you know what they used to make here? He gestured to the cobweb-covered equipment and conveyor belts around them, faintly visible in the light cast from Albert's lantern. Mark shook his head. No idea. This was the main factory for Anderson's turkey pot pies. Mark folded his arms. Never heard of them. Neither did I. They went out of business in the 80s, but the town archives say this place was the biggest employer in the county. They made millions of pies a year. So, this place, this building, is where millions of turkeys met their end. How's that for death and darkness? Mark sighed, looking unimpressed. Okay, fine, Albert said. Look, it's a small town and it's all we got. Do you want to do this or not? Mark thought for a moment. Did he really want to do this? Regaining the use of his legs through dark magic. Seems like the kind of thing that works in the movies, but not in real life. Oh well, it's not like he had anything else to do tonight in this crappy, unsympathetic town. And the worst thing that could happen is, well, he'd wake up tomorrow still crippled. Okay. What else do you got? Mark said. Albert smiled. Flesh that was once alive. Albert pulled something from his bag. Is that a chicken? A frozen chicken? Look, if you're gonna nitpick everything... No, Mark said. Please continue. Albert pulled out another item. The hair of a virgin. Where did you get that hair? My sister. Mark laughed. Your sister's not a... Mark stopped himself. Never mind. Please continue. Albert pulled out the next item. An object of mysterious origin. He pulled away its tinfoil confines, revealing something that was both smooth and rough, hairy and balding, colorful and transparent. What is that? Mark leaned forward. It looks familiar. It should, Albert said. They served it in the cafeteria last week with the meatless meatloaf. Remember? Oh, yeah, Mark said. I heard Paul Krendler ate one on a dare. He hasn't been back to school since. Object of mysterious origin, Albert repeated, a little more prideful this time. Then he said it with the other objects. And last but not least, an offering from the modern world. Is that your little brother's phone? Yeah, Albert said, turning it over, showing off the Pikachu protective case. He's getting upgraded for his birthday next week anyway, so he won't have long to miss this one. Besides, all he ever does is play Pokemon Go. So immature. You play that? No, Albert said. Not really. A bit. On the weekends, if I have time. Are you ready to get this party started? Absolutely. Let's go. What do I do? Albert tossed him a lighter. Start lighting the candles. There were at least 20 candles arranged in a circle around the pentagram, and/or Star of David, whose diameter was about 6 feet. It was obvious that Albert had swiped his little sister's sidewalk chalk because the 6-pointed star was purple, and the candles Mark was lighting were leftover birthday candles, the kind you find in a junk drawer, half-used and fashioned to represent various themes of birthdays past. Pirate candles, Star Wars, Dora the Explorer, Curious George, dinosaurs, and quite a few that were just numbers. A half-melted number 8, 9, and 11. With neither of them having jobs, the budget for the dark magic ritual was on the low side, but this was starting to feel ridiculous. He couldn't imagine what kind of demon would show up with these crappy offerings. Oh well, this was all just make-believe anyway, and in some ways it was as much for Albert as it was for Mark. Albert harbored guilt for Mark's condition. Mark had known that for a while, but they'd never talked about it. What was the point? It had been Albert's idea to build the go-kart when they were 9, and it had been Albert's idea to test it on Foreman's Hill. And it had been Albert who had chickened out at the last moment, leaving Mark to pilot the cart down the hill alone. Albert wasn't responsible for putting the enormous oak in Mark's way, the one he cracked his head on, and broke his back. But he did push him off, running along the side, his legs pumping like pistons, and just before he let go, he said, "See you on the other side." Mark never asked Albert what he had meant by that. In fact, he'd even forgotten about it with all that had happened after hitting the tree. Physical therapy, learning to live in half of a body and adjusting every vision he'd ever had about his own future took up most of his time. It wasn't until recently that he remembered those words. Why? He couldn't say. Mark lit the last candle and looked over at Albert. "What are you doing?" "I'm outlining the whole area in salt. We stay on the outside, and the demon is stuck in the inside." "What's that smell?" "Lavender, I think." "Bath salt." "Yeah, my mom has bags of this stuff." The purplish salt went with the pretty purple chalk star, which Mark wanted to comment on, but then thought better of it. "Where do you want me?" "Set yourself at the bottom of the pentagram, outside the salt line, and make sure you're out of reach." "How far can a demon reach?" Albert stopped pouring salt. I didn't see. He glanced over at the papers he printed out from the internet. Not sure. Wasn't a real question, Mark said, rolling into position. I'll just eyeball it. Finishing the bath salt circle, Albert tossed the bag to the side, then picked up his short stack of papers. He flipped through them for a second, then seemed to find his place. Okay, we need to picture a door. What kind of door? Mark said. I don't know. Just a door. Well, like a single door? Double door? Does it have a screen or one of those little windows or peepholes? Albert flipped through his pages. It can be any kind of door. We just have to picture the same door. What was the first door you thought of? Honestly? Yeah. Your sister's? What? Well, remember before she painted it all black, it had that rainbow pattern with flowers and My Little Pony stickers? Why the hell would you think of that? I always thought it was so cool. My parents would never let me do that to my door. Fine, Albert said. We'll both think of that. Which version? All black or My Little Ponies? Ponies. Albert frowned. I'm sensing that you're not taking this seriously. Mark chuckled. Dude, I just lit Star Wars and Curious George candles to summon a demon. Hey, I went to a lot of trouble to set this up. Mark grimaced. Dude, Curious George candles. Okay, Albert said. I went to a moderate amount of trouble to set this up. Mark didn't respond, just stared back at his friend. Yeah, okay, I half-assed some of this, but this stuff is just symbols, superficial offerings. He held out the papers. It's these incantations that are the real magic. And according to enterthedarkness.com, this will work. Well, if it's on the internet, it must be real, Mark said. What's next? Albert turned off the lantern. Although there were almost 20 candles, they didn't put out anywhere near as much light as the lantern had. Darkness within the abandoned factory grew closer, and Mark couldn't see very much beyond the circle. The conveyor belts and static equipment were just strange shapes in the encroaching darkness. Albert sat opposite Mark. He crossed his legs and met his friend's eyes. Are you visualizing the door? Mark nodded. Ponies and all. Then let's begin. Albert held out the papers. Krabba, Zetoa, Bo Kerpla, Estra Mine, Trekrepta. What language is that? I don't know. That literally sounds like Klingon. It's not Klingon. How do you even know you're pronouncing it right? Phonetic spelling was provided with the text, and there's a how-to video on YouTube. Any more questions? No. I'm good. Sorry. I'm picturing the door. Sabatwo, Fraka Cronin Pickle, Tiddlepow, Witchencamp, the Fenny Go Menra. Several candles flared a bit as if a small cloud of methane had passed near. Mark's heart quickened, and he gazed across the circle. Mark saw his own surprise mixed with excitement mirrored on Albert's face. Keep going. Albert searched for his place. Ramen, Kudel, Basum, Checker, Me, Fenny, Off, Fenny Lu, Fenny Bop Unkan, Fenny Amadeus. Is that it? No, there's like this whole page I have to do. Why'd you stop? Well, I just noticed something. Before Mark could ask what, he noticed it as well. The center of the star was gone. He could still see the chalk outline all right, but the center section, where once there was old, scuffed cement floor, there was now no floor at all. And in its place, a hole. When did that happen? Albert shook his head. He motioned to the papers in his hand with a tilt of his head. Mark nodded enthusiastically, then took a deep breath in an attempt to quell his shaking hands. When that didn't work, he gripped the arms of his chair tight. Fenny, Abdul S. son, Fenny Macklin Kendall. As Albert continued his recitation, Mark couldn't take his eyes off the hole in the cement floor. Was it an optical illusion? No. It's real. The candle shed no light into the opening. But somehow, Mark knew that even if he'd shone a flashlight down into it, its depths would remain unseen. The whole idea that there was a hole in the middle of the floor appearing from nowhere was disturbing on several levels. Where did it come from? What was down there? How far to the bottom? And what would come through? But even more mind-blowing, something was happening. Really happening. Albert's shitty household offerings and internet magic spell was actually working. Mark felt himself roll back a few inches. Albert stopped reading again, and the two stared at one another. Then Mark rolled again. He reached down and locked his wheels. And that's when he realized why he'd been rolling. The floor was tilting. Not a lot. Just a little. Like a slight flutter of a seesaw. "Keep going," Mark said. "Almost done." Mark felt a little nauseated and looked out into the factory to steady himself. He'd always been prone to motion sickness even before the accident. He needed to lock his eyes on a fixed object in the distance. The faint outlines of the conveyor belts would do, but he couldn't find them. Not the belts or the equipment. Gone. Beyond the candlelight, which reached about 15 feet around the circle, he could only see darkness. No shapes of any kind. Just black. His stomach was tight, and it felt as if he'd swallowed a handful of nails. And though he knew in every fiber of his being that it could not be true, he could not help the feeling that they were not in the factory anymore. He looked over at Albert, who seemed to be finishing up. "Twana, Kalpendru, Fenny Ma, Fenny True, Fenny Nikto, und I be Estroleni, no Fenny, no Fenny, no Fenny more." "Now what?" Albert shrugged. "I guess." A clanking sound rose up from the hole. Old chains clanking, turning, twisting. Then a rhythmic clicking, like something turning on a pulley. Slow, steady. The sound grew louder. Mark imagined something being hoisted upward on thick chains. The sounds grew loud, as if whatever was making them had risen from the hole and was right in front of them. But they saw nothing. Then, after excruciatingly long seconds, movement. Staring into the hole, Mark's mouth fell open as something large rose from the darkness. Hoisted up into the air by unseen chains, it rose before them. Something rectangular, something thin, something pink? "Your sister's door?" Mark said as it rose above them. The clanking sound stopped and the door, gold hinges fastened to a purple frame and all, dangled 10 feet in the air, hovering over the star. Mark felt dizzy and realized he wasn't breathing. He took 2 fast breaths, and before he exhaled the second one, Albert was at his side. "Thought you might be lonely over here by yourself." Mark nodded. "Good call." They looked up at the door, hanging above them like some strange piece of modern art that neither one of them knew what to do with. Far in the distance there was a tumbling sound, like someone falling downstairs, rolling, fighting against the fall, pausing for a second, then tumbling again. Then something hit the door with a powerful thud. "What the hell?" a deep voice said from the other side of the door. "Oh, you gotta be kidding me." Hello?" Mark said. Are you all right?" "Who said that?" returned the voice. The door handle started to wiggle, like someone trying to figure out how it worked. Before Mark could answer, the door flew open. He caught sight of a very surprised face as it fell forward, screaming, "Holy shit!" Mark watched in horror as a body tumbled through the door, landing with a splat. It lay very still for several moments. Mark reached out, wanting to help, but Albert grabbed his arm and shook his head. Mark sat back in his chair. "Are you hurt?" The demon said. Sprawled out and naked, it slowly drew its limbs in toward its body like a scared child huddled on the cold floor. Its legs were shriveled twigs and didn't look as if they functioned. Gray skin wrapped loosely around its bent bones and gaunt legs. The toenails hadn't been cut in a century, and its left arm was in the same condition. The right arm was another matter. It looked like the arm of a bodybuilder, ripped with muscle, almost cartoonishly so, and its skin glistened with a healthy flesh tone. So different from everything else on the demon, it was easy to imagine it originating from an entirely different body. Struggling, it lifted its bald, wrinkled head, eyes fluttering, one green, one scarlet.
"Whoa, where am I?"
"Indiana?" Albert said. "We summoned you." The demon flipped onto its belly and used its muscled arm to rise, resting on a pointed elbow.
"Summon me? You can't summon me!"
"Why not?" Mark said.
"I did my time in the human world. It chewed me up and spit me out,"
it said, spittle coming from its gray lips.
"I'm retired."
Albert leaned over and whispered to Mark. "I read about this. It said he would say anything to get out of doing what we ask. Try to trick us. Lie." We don't believe you," Mark said. "You have been summoned and must obey." The demon chuckled.
"You must have screwed it up really good if you got me here. Is that a frozen chicken?"
"It's almost thawed," Albert countered. With its one good arm, the demon pulled itself forward to the edge of the purple salt and sniffed.
"Lavender?"
"It's my mom's favorite."
Very nice,"
the demon said, then rolled onto its back.
"One moment I'm having a martini in my condo with a beautiful view of the river Styx. The next, Where's the door all the way up there? I almost broke my neck."
"Sorry," Albert said. "It's our first time using black magic, or any magic really."
You don't say,"
the demon said, rolling back onto his belly, the lower half of his body flopping uselessly.
"Listen here, kids. This isn't amateur hour. You have summoned a demon. Not a high demon or even a very powerful one, but a demon, nonetheless. In my day, I might have been able to do something for you, or I might have just eaten your faces. Either way, we would have moved forward. But read my lips. I am retired. So send me back, and we'll forget about your little trip down Diagon Alley, and you'll both, keep your faces, and I can get back to my martini."
"No," Albert said. "You can return to your domain when you have granted our request."
"Okay. This is the last time I'm going to put it nicely. You have screwed this up. Your offerings are insulting at best, and Am I lying on a Star of David?"
"Yeah," Albert said. "It might be."
"Jesus Christ," the demon said. "Whatever it is, although I can make an educated guess."
The demon looked at Mark's chair, then continued.
"You're not going to get it. Send me back."
Mark felt a surge of anger. It was as if all the doctors he'd seen in the past 8 years, with their lack of encouragement, depressing diagnoses, and their just-learn-to-live-with-it attitude, were fueling his temper. For years he wanted to scream almost every day. Scream at the doctors, his over-concerned parents, his teachers with their unwanted pity, at everyone in this stupid little town. Even at Albert, with his 2 perfectly healthy legs. And here was a chance to undo all that. make everything go away, hit the reset button, and this thing, this shriveled little creature with the power to fix him, was saying no. "You're not going anywhere," Mark said. "You have been summoned, and you will grant our request."
"Have it your way, kids," the demon said. "But since your offerings are dismal, and I suspect your reading of the unholy words was equally appalling, there must be a sacrifice."
"What?" Albert said. No. There's nothing in my research that said we needed to make a sacrifice once we have you here. The offering should be enough."
"How did you come by your research?" the demon asked.
"Google," Albert said. The demon rolled his differently colored eyes.
"Check the fine print on your instructions. Paragraph 6, subsection 6, line 6. You can read it for yourself."
Albert skimmed through his handful of papers, flipping to almost the last page. Oh, crap. What? He's telling the truth. What does it say? If the offerings are deemed subpar and/or there are errors in the reading of the unholy words, then a sacrifice must be made in order to proceed. 1 human soul per request. The more significant the sacrifice to the one making the request, the more potent will be the magic used.
"Which means, Mark," the demon smiled, "the more important the soul is to you, the more powerful the magic I can use to grant your request. Still want to play this game, kids?"
"I swear I didn't know about this," Albert said. "What, do you want to do? What will happen to our sacrifice?"
"If you're even considering going forward with this," the demon said, "then you really don't want to know."
"Shit," Albert said. "Well, that doesn't sound good. Let's, pick someone we hate."
"Do you two idiots understand the meaning of sacrifice? Sending someone you hate into the darkness isn't a sacrifice. It's a favor, one you would owe for. If you want this to work, it must be someone you care about, love even. The stronger your feelings, the greater the chance of getting what you want. I cannot be any clearer than that."
Albert leaned close to Mark and lowered his voice. "How about Paul Krindler? If he really did eat the mysterious object served in the cafeteria, then he's dead already. Even if he isn't, I don't have any feelings. I mean, I don't care about him," Mark whispered. "Oh, how about Mary Feng? You've been crushing on her since 8th grade." "No," Mark said too loud, then lowered his voice back to a whisper. "She's the one I want to ask to prom. I've been dreaming of dancing with the moment I get my legs back." "If you don't get your legs back, you won't be dancing with anyone at the prom." "I guess," Mark said, wondering if he could really do it. Then he had a thought. Maybe there was a better choice. Someone that would be a real sacrifice. Someone that he had cared about since kindergarten. Someone that had cared about him. And someone that was partially responsible for him being in this wheelchair in the first place. But could he do it? "So, Mary then?" Albert whispered. Mark nodded.
"Has a choice been made?"
the demon said. "Yes," Mark said.
"Do not speak the name aloud. Hold it in your mind," the demon said. "The magic will be more powerful."
Mark was relieved about that. He didn't know if he could go through with it otherwise. "Well, what next?" Albert said.
"Your request?"
the demon said.
"Again, do not speak it aloud. I must take it from you."
The demon closed his eyes, and Mark could feel him entering his memories, like someone flipping through folders in a file cabinet.
"That little town of yours, Bunker Hill, has made you feel like an outcast," the demon said.
"Yes," Mark said.
"Bullies call you Wheels, Halfling, and Roller Boy."
Mark nodded, his eyes glassy.
"You couldn't go on a field trip last week because of the hiking and the stairs to the lookout. Many places that everyone else can go are off limits to you," the demon said.
"Yes," Mark said.
You want to go anywhere they can go.
Yes.
You want your legs to work just as well as everyone else's in that shithole you call a town, the demon said. I understand.
Yes.
It is time. Go through the door.
What door? Albert said. The demon pointed a finger to their left. The pink door with its purple frame was now resting on the ground 10 feet away, at the edge of where the candlelight faded into darkness.
Go through it now!
Mark felt the urgency in the demon's voice deep in his chest. His heart thumped like a jackhammer. He unlocked his wheels, spun to the left, and headed for the door. "Wait!" Albert said. Mark didn't want to look back. He reached the door and grabbed the handle. "Wait, Mark!" Albert pleaded. "I can't move!" Mark turned the handle. "Why can't I move?" The door opened, and Mark hesitated. He looked back. Albert was still in the position he'd left him, crouched next to a chair that was no longer there. The demon's enormous hand, muscles pulsing, reached out beyond the circle. Its fingers enveloped Albert's ankle. "No!" Albert screamed.
Go now!
The demon shouted.
Or his sacrifice will be for nothing!
"I'm sorry, Albert," Mark said, not loud enough for anyone to hear. Mark turned back to the door. A scream boomed behind him as he propelled himself through the pink and purple opening. Before he passed completely through its frame, he felt himself falling. His chair fell away, and he watched it tumble into a void of swirling color. There was an explosion of fire. He felt the heat before he saw the flames rising from beneath him. The flames consumed him in an instant, and everything burned. Even his legs were on fire. He felt them burn. Mark sat up in his bed, covered in sweat. He ran his hands over his body, quickly checking for flames. It wasn't on fire. It wasn't even warm. What the hell? He said to an empty bedroom. He couldn't remember how he'd gotten home or putting his pajamas on. Did it really happen? Although the flames were not real, the pain he felt certainly was. Even the pain in his legs. Real pain. In his legs. He pulled the blankets away and looked at his legs. They didn't look different. He touched them with both hands. No feeling. Nothing. A stupid dream. Just stupid, wishful dreaming. He wiped his eyes and ran his fingers through his hair. If disappointment were a sledgehammer, it would have cracked his skull open. The worst of it was that he now had to summon the energy to get up and be the town's crippled boy again, as he was yesterday and the day before. Soft sobbing filtered into his room. Familiar. He looked at his slightly ajar door. The weeping got louder. Then, there was a thud from down the hall. "Mom!" Mark yelled. There was uncontrollable crying coming from somewhere in his house. Mark reached for his chair. "Mom, are you all right?" His mom responded, but through the crying, he could not understand what she said. "Dad!" Mark yelled. "What's wrong with Mom?" A helicopter buzzed the house as Mark's dad yelled back from down the hall. "I don't know, son. We can't. Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Why is Mom crying?" "Just stay there," Mark's dad said. "Everything is going to be all right. Everything. Dad?" Mark lunged for his chair. It was a bit out of reach, but he managed. He slid in his seat and moved to the hall. His heart was racing, his fingers trembling, and his grip on his hand rims was shaky, barely enough to propel him. He leaned forward, hoping the chair would follow. The sound of his mother's tears was maddening. Was she hurt? Was someone hurting her? And why had Dad stopped talking? "Mom, I'm coming!" Mark shouted, barreling toward the bedroom door. He had navigated the opening to his room hundreds, no, thousands of times, but in his desperation to reach his mother, his aim was off. Not a lot, but enough to hang his left rear wheel on the door frame. His chair tilted one way, and Mark tumbled the other. He hit the floor with a solid smack, a stomach-punching belly flop. He looked back at the empty chair almost with a look of betrayal. Instantly, he realized he could crawl to his parents' room in half the time it would take to remount his chair. With the wind knocked out of him and bruised ribs, he pulled himself forward. "Dad!" Mark shouted, rising up on his hands. The lack of response sent a wave of fear through his body. He hand-walked the next few yards in seconds. The door to the master bedroom was ajar, and with no concern how it would feel, he hit the door with his forehead, sending it wide open. "Mom!" The first thing he saw was her face, one middle-aged cheek pressed to the carpet. The next was her outstretched hands, fingernails digging into the shag. One leg was on the floor, half under the bed. The other was trapped midway between the floor and the bed, hung up in the bedding. "Mom!" Mark hurried over to her and took her hand. "What's wrong?" I can't move," she said, tears running into the carpet. Mark rose up, scanned the bed, catching sight of his father, sitting up, hands over his face. "Dad, Mom fell," Mark said. "Please, come help her." His father dropped his hands, looked at his son, and with glassy eyes said, "I can't." "This can't be right," said Bill Hollowell, weekend anchor at CNN. "Just read the statement, Bill," the news director said through Bill's earpiece. "We're going to skip the usual intro and go right into it." "But John, is this true? We have no way of verifying it, but it's an official statement. We'll cut to Jill on location after you read the release. You can throw some questions her way. You're live in 5, 4. Bill watched the opening graphics scroll across the monitor, and before he was really ready, the stage manager pointed at him. He swallowed hard before speaking. After a 48-hour quarantine of the entire town of Bunker Hill, Indiana, the CDC, in collaboration with the World Health Organization, has finally released a statement. Bill waited a beat for the next to appear on the monitor. On the morning of June 6th, an unknown pathogen affected the residents of Bunker Hill, Indiana. The situation is town-wide, and the CDC, with the assistance of the National Guard, has taken these extreme quarantine measures to ensure the safety of the surrounding counties and the general population at large. The origins of this disease, its gestation period, and how it is transmitted have all yet to be identified, but the main symptom is consistent with all infected. Every resident who is physically in the town of Bunker Hill at 6 a.m. on the morning of June 6th is experiencing paralysis from the waist down. Every man, woman, and child has become paralyzed.
Dear whoever finds this, my name is Stephen. I'm 25 years old and, well, if you're reading this, then I'm afraid that I'm long gone. Where, you ask? Your guess is as good as mine, dead, alive, or something much worse. I cannot tell you. I'm currently sat in my basement. I say currently, but I've been in this dreary, beaten brick-walled prison for weeks now, maybe months. Time isn't relevant down here. Nothing is relevant. I'm here now, and in all honesty, I don't know whether that's good or bad. I started counting down the days by etching a dash for each day, but after the sun went down and never came up, I stopped. The small rectangular window being my only connection to the outside world didn't last very long, although with the rain cascading down it, I couldn't really see out of it anyway. Just a warped screenshot of my neighbourhood. What was once my beacon of hope became my tormentor. Knowing just outside that window I could be free. But for how long?
The voices come to me regularly. I only ever get a short respite before they start weeping again. Telling me it's safe out, pleading at me to open the door. All I know is I'm safe right now. Safety is a concept I took for granted. Now, I truly know the meaning of the word. Being able to walk outside, breathe the fresh air without knowing it could be your last. I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to get this written down whilst I still can, and whilst I'm still sane enough to remember. I'll go back to the beginning, before the sun went black and this basement became my tomb, before the voices became tempting. I used to have a pretty boring life, stacking shelves 5 days a week, painting portraits and luscious landscapes in the little free time I had in between. Sometimes I'd conjure up morbid scenes, future cities built like concrete jungles, barren nuclear wastelands. There's something calming about seeing a decimated world and then looking out your window to see luscious fields, unknowing it could be all decimated in a few short weeks. God, even a flock of pigeons would have been a welcome sight if only I knew. It was during one of my 15-hour shifts, stacking boxes on top of boxes, that something felt off. It was the start of this lockdown, this storm in its youth, but still on the tip of everyone's tongue. The media were calling it the storm of the century, but we didn't have many, if any, storms here. An occasional bit of shitty weather, but never like this. It was a pain with all the panic buyers, but hey, they were paying me overtime for a menial task, so I can't complain. Susie came up to me just after my shift started, her cute button nose looking up to me. The 5'2" brunette, 21 years old, had been a close friend since secondary school. We'd never really talked much in school or even outside of it, really, now that I think of it. I guess my version of a close friend was someone I'd say hi to more than once a week. We worked together for a few months now, and she always made time for me. Although I didn't reply much, we'd text on and off to catch up on each other's lives. We both had rough patches in our lives, and for some odd reason, we'd also confide in each other.
"Hey Stephen, any plans for the weekend?"
she said, her eyes twinkling with a look of excitement splattered across her face. "Hi, Sue. Not much. Just going to have a quiet one in. I gotta take my dog Rex to the vets whilst I get the chance."
"Alright, sounds fun. Well, I'm having a party Saturday night, so feel free to stop by. I mean, if you're not too busy."
"Yeah, sure. I'll think about it," I confidently said, knowing fully well that I wouldn't be attending. I hated the social expectations having friends brought with it. I'd rather much stay in my own bubble and mind my own business. The companionship was nice at times, but I soon find myself overwhelmed and anxious. A smile lit up her face instantly to my acceptance, and she skipped off down the aisle, leaving me to get on with my day. I popped my playlist on and blocked out the world before getting back to the endless stacking of ravaged shelves, hoping they'd last longer than 10 minutes before I had to repeat the whole ordeal again. It was about 6 hours into my usual routine of plugging out the world when it was disturbed by this guttural calling. Distant first. I could hear it in the background when the music was quiet, thinking it was just parts of the songs that I'd never picked up on, or a distortion through my headphones. Couldn't make out a single note of it, but it was definitely something. It got progressively louder throughout the next few tracks, right up till it started drowning out my music, then my thoughts, till all I could think and hear was it. I ripped out my headphones, hoping it would just end my torment. It worked for a split second, my ears trying to recover, when just as quickly as it had stopped, a gargantuan boom echoed around me, reverberating through my bones. "Come here." I snapped to and realised
Mrs. Peters, one of our regular late afternoon shoppers, was calling me. "Come here!" she barked whilst pointing to the can of dog food just out of reach of her frail, bony fingers. The veil of anxiety washed away just as quickly as it was coursing through my veins. "Of course, I'm coming." I cheerfully exhaled as I reached past her, plucking the can of processed shit that her dog would happily munch down on later. As she snatched the premium dog chum out of my hand, I noticed something. Her hands. They were completely white and frozen to the touch. I swear my heart skipped a beat when she touched me. A vicious sweat broke across my brow instantly as I saw her eyes. Oh God, her eyes! The usual brown safe haven of Mrs. Peters' warming eyes had disappeared. All I could see was a never-ending abyss in place of those dark amber eyes, staring into my soul, judging my every sin. I felt completely powerless. A sharp pain seared into the back of my skull, crippling me completely. The calling came back. This time it wasn't distant, and it wasn't coming from her. I mean, she was mouthing the words, but I could hear it inside my head like a siren wail, intoxicating my very existence. Whilst this didn't sound like the usually chirpy pensioner, it definitely sounded like the monstrosity stood before me. I stumbled back, hitting the shelves behind, causing a small army of cereal boxes to crash to the floor. Every cell of my being wanted to just run out of the store and never come back. I looked up, terror somehow playing me like a puppet master, even though no part of me wanted to see that thing again. She wasn't there. I don't mean she had walked off. She took about a year to get around the shop as it was on a good day. She completely disappeared. In an aisle full of arseholes acting as roadblocks, how could this 82-year-old lady disappear without so much as a trace? Worst of all, a damned can was back on the shelf. I picked myself up and steadied myself, trying not to look crazy. After already making a dick of myself, I patted my shirt down, pushing the picture of Mrs. Peters' godforsaken face to the furthest recesses of my mind. A few people saw and gave me odd looks. Concerned, but definitely confusion-riddled within. I plastered a fake smile on my face and I got on with my day. The rest of my shift went without a hitch. Trying to forget about the day's earlier event, just attributing it to my overactive imagination and a little old lady demanding help who managed to pull a Houdini with all the extra bodies in the store. I was working ridiculous shifts and tired to no end. I just needed a rest, right? It wasn't that easy though. I had this overpowering feeling of dread poisoning my every thought. Thinking back now, I shouldn't have been so naive, but hey, no one could have predicted what was to happen. And in all honesty, what could I do? Anyway, I was just about done with my shift, drained, hungry and ready for a quick bike home to my empty 2-story wooden farmhouse passed down through the family. I was the only one left of the Charles family. My mum passed away when I was just 7. Breast cancer. My father, a drunk who didn't know what he loved more, alcohol or himself, ran away shortly after, only leaving a note at the foot of the basement door. No one's heard from him since. My grandparents took reign in my childhood and I can't lie, they gave me a good life. They let me run free and well, I guess that's why I'm the way I am today. When I turned 18, the house got signed into my name and I've lived there ever since. Being a kid in the middle of nowhere without anyone your age means you have to find other ways to entertain yourself, so I used to have a few imaginary friends. I forget their names now, but they helped a lot. My background doesn't matter too much to this tale. I used to have to go to the doctors a few times a week as a child, After a couple years pumped with medication, my grandparents stopped making me go. Thought it was too much for someone my age. Thanks to everything I had to take and being so young, I forgot what it was that I went for exactly. Sorry, I'm losing track again. I'd like to say that it was the only encounter I had that day, but cycling home at 1 a.m. was like walking to Mordor. The shadows taunted me, enticing me to take just one look. No matter how hard I tried to focus on the roads, each alleyway whispered my deepest desires, my inner fears. I could feel every hair on my body raised, goosebumps tickling my arms. The hordes hidden in the depths of the winding side roads, challenging me to look. The rain had started to hammer down, calling for my attention to remain on the roads. Turning the block just before the home stretch usually gave me a second wind, carrying me back to those 4 warm walls, my shelter from everything and everyone. That's when I heard a piercing scream. It wasn't just calling for anyone either. It called me by my name.
Stephen, please help.
I slammed on my brakes, almost flying over the handlebars, and just stopped for what felt like forever, scanning the area like a captain with his periscope.
Stephen!
Chill ran down my spine, and it didn't stop until my whole body shivered. It was right behind me, not in one of those den of thieves, shrouded in darkness, but what felt like 2 feet behind me. Every logical part of me was telling me to go. Don't turn back, get home, bolt the door and hide. After an age of deliberating, I slowly craned my head around, right foot resting just above my pedal, ready for a sprint. There she was. It was Mrs. Peters. Those same vile eyes staring me down, consuming me. The flickering street light barely illuminating her corpse-like body. But there was no mistaking those eyes. This time I could see further into them somehow, as if the darkness of the night enveloping around us gave them more strength. I hadn't noticed at first, but she was completely bare. No clothing, nothing. Her feet dirty and black from the gravel. You'd think that was enough to unnerve me, and I suppose it was. That's when I noticed the skin on her body. It sagged, but not like it naturally would through old age. It was as if it wasn't hers, or at least wasn't what stood in front of me. I've never seen skin so white and devoid of life. I didn't wait to see what she had in store for me. She started to reach forward, as if begging for help again, just as she did at work. Before her hand had lifted even an inch, I threw my right leg forward, pushing down on that pedal, as if my life depended on it. I didn't stop. I barely even took a breath till I saw my front door. I ran in, hearing it again.
Stephen, it's me.
This time, I couldn't decipher where from, but I didn't care. If I got inside, I'd be safe, right? Throwing the door open and slamming it behind me, I heard nails clicking along the old pine flooring. At first slow, now sounding to gallop towards me. The image of the woman running towards me, skin trailing behind her like a flag, flooded my thoughts. I started to run, and just as I got to the foot of my stairs, something lunged on me, making me collapse to the floor. My head thumped off the floor, throwing me into a state of shock, and without thinking, I covered my face, fearing the worst, praying to God to make it quick. Don't make me suffer. I felt its presence bearing over me, blocking out the porch light shining through my front door. The clicking of its nails, sending shrieks through my body. It got closer. I felt a warm breath on my hands. Being my last bastion of defense, the disgusting stench it brought with it was enough to make me throw up. Then a loud, piggy snort and licking ensued. Fuck! It was Rex. The big-hulled brute of a staffy was happy to see me. Lord knows I was happy to see him too. I let out a sigh of relief, feeling all the tension fade away, pushing myself to a seated position against the wall, and played with him for a few minutes, immediately forgetting about what just happened. Dogs have a way of doing that. I got myself a quick shower, made dinner and went to serve Rex in his dog bowl he protected with his life. Looking for dog food, I noticed something. Among all the cans, there was just one out of place. Now Rex was a fussy dog, believe it or not, so I knew to get the same select few each time. Out of the cans that stood to attention, to the left out of regiment, was the one Mrs. Peters asked for earlier. Premium dog chum. The thoughts crashing down on me again like waves on the coast. A second panic attack started to usher its way in. Without second-guessing myself, I picked it up, opened my back door, and I threw it. Not very neighbour-friendly, but I'd had enough. Trying to convince myself I wasn't crazy, served up Rex's meal and shortly after got myself into bed. As much as my brain wanted to process everything that happened throughout the day, I was exhausted. I drifted off in record time. The next morning I woke up, head foggy. I may have passed out instantly, but waking up well rested was not on the agenda that day. Rex was just sitting in his corner in the morning. He gave me a nod of approval and I patted him on the head. "Hey buddy, are you ready for the vets?" I said in a voice we all say for our furballs. The storm was starting to pick up outside. Those ominous clouds soon took over the sky, blocking out the sun, and I decided I'll take him next week. With my plans dashed for the one-day weekend I had, I decided to skip breakfast and get straight to painting. I opted to do another portrait, something a bit cheery. I'd had enough morbidity for a while, so I wanted to take my mind off. As the hours passed, fully taken in with the masterpiece I was creating, Rex still sat in his corner, I decided to grab a bite to eat. The wind was whistling through the hollow bones of my home. I took another look outside, and all I could see were those jet black clouds, never ending. The rain was heaving now. Many rivers raging down the sides of the street and creating whirlpools around the drains. I scanned the street for any sign of life. Not a soul was out. Well, that's what I thought. As I started to turn and draw my curtains, I noticed footprints in the grass just in front of my window. No tracks of someone walking to that spot outside my window. Just 2 footprints about 3 feet away. The rain must have been coming down for hours by that time, but the grass looked completely dry where those feet had been. As if whoever had been out there had been out there all day. I noticed the blackening around the edges of the solitary tracks. Was it burnt or some sort of substance? So I tried to inspect the unknown goo closer. A glint in the window caught my attention. 2 piercing orbs just hung there, just below my eyeline. Looking closer to see where they were emanating from, I noticed something. They weren't coming from outside. They were right behind me. A tingle ran down my spine as the pin dropped. I spun around, almost sweeping myself off my feet. Nothing. Something in the back of my head made me look over to the basement door. A sense of dread always swept across me with the thought of going down there. Still standing by the window, I listened out in silence, trying to detect anything out of place. I can't tell you how difficult this was, with the rain bombarding the windows and the wind risking to rip my door off. I contorted my neck, almost giving myself whiplash. I looked over to the labour of my day, the painting, the noise coming directly behind it. In denial of the terror I was experiencing, I creeped over to it. The area being dimly lit by the grey strands of sunlight that pierced the clouds made it difficult to see from the other side of the room. It was as I got closer that I started to hone in on the source of the sound. The goddamn painting. The innocent blonde-haired Mona Lisa I had created wasn't how I left it. The hair that boasted a light gold was brown with dirt grey roots, threatening to take over. A smile which once shone brighter than the pearly whites now featured brown, decaying teeth, which no longer sat where they should. I couldn't breathe. A new voice came to me that instant. It imitated Susie. Badly, gargled words plagued my mind. I was too shaken up by the picture to even try to comprehend them. If I could hazard a guess now, parts sounded Latin, but I feel some of the things I heard weren't intended for human ears or minds. They paralysed me, leaving me a complete nervous wreck, unable to move, think. Hell, I don't even remember breathing. As terrifying as they were, I felt a sense of clarity and something familiar about them from my core which didn't manifest itself till afterwards. As suddenly as the tongue of ancients had started lashing my mind, they disappeared. Turning back to that ghastly painting, after having been on all fours clutching at my head, it had returned to the serene woman it was before. No eyes of pure sorrow, no tattered skin, and her teeth back to their former glory. Knowing I was beginning to fall into madness concocted by my own mixture of lack of sleep, anxiety, and my own worst enemy, my mind, I decided it was time to go to sleep. Rex hadn't moved all day, hadn't touched his bowl of food either. Before I hit the hay, I decided to replace his food just in case he started to get fussy with his usual delicacy. Picking up the first can I could reach from the cupboard, I lazily opened it up and lathered it into his bowl. To make sure he had something, I also put a couple of dog treats next to his bowl. The little guy hadn't eaten all day. Finally, nothing to do but surrender to the night. My head hit the goose-feathered pillow, and I was lost in the comfort of my king-size mattress for one. I was plagued by horrible things that night. Even now I can't quite recall what I witnessed or what I heard, but this overbearing feeling of doom took over me. The only thing I can remember is seeing the blackness, the ever-evolving dark that seemed to take form and dissipate back into nothingness. Endless. It was almost the same as when you close your eyes in the dark. Your eyelids firmly shut, but your eyes still function, and seeing nothing. Multicoloured strips flash by and you know nothing is there, but your instincts scream at you to open your eyes. I woke up, sheets soaked and my body dripping with sweat. A buzz of paranoia overwhelmed me, every limb feeling like static as my nerves were bombarded. Scanning my room, everything was in order. No boogeyman ready to pounce and no noises other than that rain and wind whistling through the neighbourhood. I laughed to myself and gave myself a quick pep talk so I could get ready for a long day at work, and I jumped in the shower. Getting out of the shower, towel draped across me like a Roman emperor, I heard a quick tapping on the front door. It got louder and louder. Whoever was down there must have been something important to tell me. As long as it wasn't one of those idiot door-to-door salesmen. No, I would not like your miracle cleaner, sir. Throwing my dressing gown on, the tapping turned into loud bangs.
Let us in.
Rung through my house as I clambered down the stairs. The wind really must have been picking up, as the call for help drifted away and didn't really begin or end from the door. I got to the foot of the door and I swung it open. "I heard you the first time. I have a doorbell, you know," I said, trying to act as alpha as I could. There was nothing there again. Nothing except a torrent of water and wind buffeting my porch. That storm was getting into its worst now, and I could see the trees swaying as if they had no roots. A piercing but distant sound of sheet metal warping and grinding could also be heard in the distance. I was shook up from the last few days of panic buying and whatever it was that I'd been seeing and hearing. I completely forgot my house was in the danger zone for the storm. Knowing I wouldn't be able to go into work till this had cleared, I called in and I told them I wouldn't be there. They didn't understand my reasoning, but I didn't care. I wanted to stay safe. Going to work during this wasn't happening. Instead, I decided to stormproof my house. This was an older house, and whilst it had been standing strong for a few generations, I wasn't stupid enough to think the house could take the full brunt of the storm without a little help. I threw my heavy-duty jacket on, boots and waterproofs, and ventured out to the local hardware store to pick up some 2x4s and nails. The second I stepped outside, I was challenged by the ungodly weather. Soaked within seconds, I ran to and from the store, almost getting pushed into the road numerous times. Getting home, I quickly got to the task of boarding up my windows. I made quick work of it, fighting with the wind as it tried to wrestle the planks from my grasp. As I was getting to the last ones, I realised this was where those footprints had been. Surveying the grass, I couldn't see them now, or the black remnants that should have been burnt into the terrain still. This eased me a little, knowing what I'd seen the other night wasn't there and could have just been my imagination brought everything into perspective. Finishing off, I debated whether covering the windows was enough. After getting wary of the rain within the next minute, I decided to leave it. No need to board the doors, I thought. Not yet, at least. The storm was predicted to last about another week, and things went without a hitch the first 2 days. Nothing to scare me or entice me out of my home. I painted like never before, using the visions I had as inspiration instead of fuel to burn myself to the ground. It was day 3 when I started hearing the scratching. Minding my business and playing with Rex in his corner, the sound of nails on a chalkboard screeched through my soul. It was coming from outside my living room window, where the footprints had been. A slow, insidious noise that demanded all attention slowly got more erratic. Walking over to the window, I tried to peer out through the slats of light, staying hidden from the instigator of the sound. The sky had a red hue to it, with dark grey encompassing almost every inch visible. But in front of my window stood something. This wasn't what I was used to. This wasn't something anyone would be used to. This wasn't natural. Standing directly in front of the window was this thing. It was nothing like what I had encountered in the previous days. Its body was brown and mummified. Shavings of skin hung to its frame, ready to flake off at the slightest shake. The flesh around its chest had started to rot. I could see maggots poking their heads out as they took in fresh air for the first time, quickly retreating and burrowing their way back into the banquet. Its legs and arms were almost completely scabbed over, with dark reds oozing here and there. I saw those bony fingers again, whilst the rest of the thing was putrid. Its hands were bleach white, which quickly faded to the rotten brown at the wrists. Usually veins would show like the northern lights on a white this pale, but it was completely devoid of any life. Its long nails had cracked and shattered into dozens of sharp daggers. Couldn't quite make out its face. I didn't want to either. Whatever that thing was, I had already seen enough. It just stood there, twitching unnaturally every few seconds. Cracks traversing its forearms. With each rupture of movement, it struggled to lift its carcass-like arm, but eventually managed to raise it just about my eye level. So far, it hadn't made any signs it knew I was there. Angled like a contortionist with my head at 90 degrees, with the rest of my body pressed up against the wall. Its blackened nails pressed against the pane of glass that was peeking between the planks on the other side of the window, and clumsily scraped across it, each millimetre bringing with it a chorus of pain and suffering. I struggled not to let out the agony in my breath, but held it down. Its fingers danced along the glass for another minute before I heard a bark come from behind me. Finally, Rex had woken up. I gave him a little nod and held my finger to my lips, hoping he'd be quiet. He seemed to get with the program straight away. Turning back to the show before me, I saw nothing. No noises. No hideous monster to drag me out. That's when I looked out the window properly this time. My head no longer dangling at an angle. Looking straight ahead, I realised something. It hadn't just been scratching the window. It had written something. Trying to make out the jagged etchings, I realised they were letters. I see you. At first, I stood there in disbelief. This couldn't be real, could it? As it all dawned upon me, I started to shake. Tears starting to crest my cheeks and fell to the floor beneath me. Scared to death and worried about what might happen next, I started to board up every opening in my house. Any entrance and exit I had was blocked. Nothing in, nothing out. I'd be safe from the storm and whatever it brought with it. The only thing coming through there were a few beams of sunlight in most openings. Rays of hope to keep me going. Although with the storm showing no signs of stopping soon, those were few and far between. I shouted over to Rex, thinking my trusty companion would protect me, but he was still in his corner. No nod. Maybe he's been as tired as I have. I didn't bother to go over to him, allowing him to get as much sleep as he needed. I don't know whether he saw them, but with every hour that the cogs in my head would go into overdrive, he'd stay in the corner more, sleep more throughout the day when he'd usually be bounding around. I didn't take it out on him, but he must have picked up that I was starting to lose it at that point. The storm calmed down a little when it got to the beginning of day 6. I thought the nightmare voices, banging, and visits were going to be coming to an end with it. Saying I was wrong would be an understatement. The banging now became a regular occurrence in the house. I say that casually, however. Every single time I heard it, I winced, shrouded in the pure terror that the thing outside was one bang closer to getting through my wooden fortress, getting to me, and doing whatever the fuck it wants to me. Every single time. I thought I'd gotten used to the rhythmic beat. My skin crawled, and I braced as I heard the house creak. Each time, I thought of those wooden planks getting weaker and weaker. Every now and then, I'd see its fingers slip through the openings and feel around. It still had Mrs. Peters' voice, routinely imitating her and asking me to come to it. After a few more days of the apparition asking me to come with its filthy mitts, I heard something. Something out of place, with the usual pleas which had become even more distorted and impatient. The sound of wood splintering. As I turned over to my living room window, I noticed a new light shining through the room. At first I thought this had already been there, but after a second barrage of knocking in the space of a few minutes, it got larger. More light seeping in, and with it, I could see it. Part of it, at least. It was getting closer to me. The grotesque being before me must have noticed the weakening timbers too, as it let out another torrent, sending splinters crashing against the thin window pane. My shelter was breached. I turned for X. Nothing. He just laid there, looking directly forward at that window. The ball I'd moved next to his bed still untouched from days before. Calling to him. His ears wouldn't even lift in acknowledgement of my cries. Not knowing what else I could do, I just stood there, waiting for whatever this thing had in store for me. I stood frozen in place for what felt like hours, eyes glazed over watching it. The banging subsided shortly after, but it was still standing there. To my horror, a new sound resonated through the bones of my home. A weird creaking. I couldn't work out what the hell it was until I saw those rotten fingers wrap around the plank of wood directly eye level. They clamped around it through the thin cracks and suddenly started pulling at it. No, 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 no! My vision started going blurry. An overwhelming queasiness flared up inside of me. The 2x4 started to bend and flex. With it I could hear the sound of the nails being yanked out. One was ripped from the safety of the window frame, and I heard it ping off the patio outside. Before I could even move, a block of light blinded me. The first plank was gone, and I finally saw its face. This thing was much larger than I initially thought. I was in line with its mouth and jaw, or what was left of it. Hanging completely agape, I could see 3 sets of teeth lining the roof of its mouth, all starting in separate places but intertwining as they grew out. Many were missing, and a large majority of them were greened and blackened. Its lower jaw was devoid of anything but that disgusting tongue. It hung there loosely, detached from the lower jaw, which should have been its nest. I could see bloody crevices scattered inside, assuming that had been where its upper teeth had laid before its jaw fell open. It didn't have any hair on its head, just a rotting scalp, littered in craters and missing chunks of flesh. The rest of its face looked ready to fall off, as the skin clung to its extremely bony features. Bags drooped around its soulless eye sockets. To my dismay, the sockets were empty. 2 vast chasms carved into its skull, knowing no end. Deeper than any mountain is high. I let out a whimper, staring into the thing's open mouth. I could see everything and nothing inside all at the same time. Unsure of what I was seeing was a conjuring of my own warped mind. It twitched immediately, its putrefied body agonizingly close to ripping apart. After it had finished its centipede dance, it stopped, mannequin-like in front of my window. I took the chance and started to back away from the new entrance to my home. Right foot, left foot, A moaning was let out by the antique wood floor beneath my right foot, as it ached from the weight of my body. As quickly as I turned to look at the source of the "I'm here" alarm, the thing started ripping at the rest of the panels as if they were twigs. Its arms getting caught up in between the planks they broke through. Blood oozing out of the old infected wounds scattered across them as it plunged further through. The sound of tree flesh being ripped apart was suddenly overridden by the voice in my head again.
Come here.
I felt every syllable chime through me. This time was different though. This time the voice had a face to it. This time it matched the abysmal horror in front of me. I clamped my hands down over my ears, trying to uselessly block out the barking. Knowing I was simply waiting for my slaughter, I started to wake up and step away again, turning around so I could no longer see it. A sudden burst of adrenaline surged through my veins, throwing my limbs into overdrive as I started to run. Without thinking, I flung open the basement door. After locking it, embracing it with a small colony of boxes, paint cans, and a shelf, placed rather annoyingly in any other situation, which I threw over the boxes for good measure. I sat down here in silence for a long time. I could hear wet feet slapping against the wooden floor above me, and the occasional scream of frustration. It was directly overhead, and I could hear its muffled, disfigured breathing getting heavier by the minute. I followed it around the house, hearing each slap on the floor, as if it were heaving itself with each step. It would wander past the basement door, but never seemed to stop in front of it. I guess my adrenaline-fueled escape plan had worked for now. It wasn't long after the footsteps ceased that I realized what situation I was in. With how quickly I ran into the basement, I didn't have time to think about what I'd need down here. 12 foot above me, there was a kitchen full of food. I'd get hungry eventually, and I'd need to venture up there. Maybe the thing would give up and leave. I still didn't want to risk it though. So I waited out that night. As the darkness consumed the night, the window of my basement became an abyss. I decided I'd try to get some rest and then go up once the sun had started to come up. The pattering of the rain outside comforted me and drowned out anything else. I woke up. Looking to the window, still seeing no colour. I'd felt like I'd slept for a while, but the sun still wasn't out. I hadn't slept for a whole day and woken at night, had I? I didn't even have a way of checking. My phone was upstairs, and whilst I did have to make the journey up there soon, my phone wasn't a priority. That's when my eye caught something in the corner of my room. A 3-foot-high shadow nestled next to the washing machine. Everything seemed to slow down for what felt like an eternity. The rain still hitting the glass outside at the same pace. I felt on high alert, every drop making my ears perk up. My eyes trying to pick up the still vague form in the corner. I could hear its muffled breathing, echoing across the basement. Eventually the shadow moved. It was as if the unknown entity had woken up and just noticed I was there. Registering me, it started to approach. I could hear its nails skipping across the concrete floor. It got within 10 feet, and all I could see was the familiar white tuft of fur on its chest. It was Rex. That's when I realized that I hadn't brought him down. In my own selfish survivalist actions, I'd forgot. I'd thought of going up for food, but not Rex. How could I forget him? But then, if I hadn't brought Rex down, how had he gotten down here? He was definitely still in his bed when I'd run down the basement. Surely I couldn't have missed him running down the stairs with me. Even as I'm writing this now, he's still on the other side of the room. The light from the single bulb hanging from the ceiling doesn't reach that side of the cellar. He's still not come out of the dark. Every now and then the light will flicker and he'll seem to get closer. No matter how much I call him, he doesn't come out. He'll stand at the edge for hours on end, looking directly in my direction. I've tried taking a closer look, but no matter how hard I try, all I see is a snow-like emblem on his chest, whilst the rest of him is obscured by darkness. It looked like it had to be him, and I'd forgotten he'd gotten down here, but whenever he'd stand watch over me for hours, I'd stay prompted against the wall, my eyes never looking anywhere else but at him. During the staring contests, I hear the voices again.
Stephen, please help.
Mrs. Peters calling me for help and Susie crying too. They'd start off sounding as if they were in real life. Each passing minute they got progressively more disturbed. Rather than taking turns, they now sung a horrific duet at me.
Please
They wouldn't
help.
stop. They haven't stopped. I just want to make them stop. They're not even the worst part of the voices. It's not always there, but it creeps in from time to time.
Help.
A manic, deep laughter will fill in the background noise, acting as ad-libs to the weathering women's voices. Not sure how much more of them I can take. Susie's voice will routinely call me and beg me to open the window. When she speaks, I completely avoid looking to that part of the cellar, not wanting to see if she's there. I know she's not there. But if there was a face to this mocking of her, I didn't want to see it. Another few restless sleeps later, her voice would be accompanied with a whittling sound at the glass. I started to place my hands over my eyes and open my fingers slightly, so I can just see the smallest sections through them. This way I can slowly look at the window with less chance of getting an eyeful. I'll scan each corner and work my way to the center of the glass, and each time I do, I see a new etching. It's trying to spell something again. It hasn't finished yet, but I'll keep you updated on that. Now, the voice, reminiscent of Miss Peters, hasn't stopped saying the same thing over. All it ever says is, "Come here." Never ending. Once every dozen times it lowers an octave and gets more hoarse, sounding in even more pain each time. I hear her along with the wet slapping of feet upstairs. They won't happen every time, but after a few hours, they come back, taunting me, freely hobbling through my house whilst I'm trapped down here. They've constantly barraged me, to the point that I'm unable to think of anything, unable to feel anything. All there is are the voices, the footsteps, and the high-pitched scratching at the damn window. Even though the voices seem to have no host, I can clearly tell they're coming from somewhere. Susie's voice from the cellar window. Mrs. Peters beckons from the top of the stairs. The only one that I still can't pin down is that laughter. I feel every bit of malice in it. I feel the fact that whatever's making it really wants to hurt me. I somehow handled the rest of this nightmare just about, but whenever that laughter starts, I can't stop the tears from rolling down my face as I feel the hatred instilled in terror. I'm completely powerless to it. They are nowhere, but they completely surround me every waking minute. I managed to write all this down, and for the first time, however long I've been here, everything's gone quiet. I can't hear any steps, no voice or laughs to torment me. Even Rex is sat in the corner and hasn't moved for the past half an hour. I think that's how long it's been at least. No way of actually telling. The howling wind and rain has eased up, and I can see clouds in the sky. Still overcast, with no hope for the sun to shine through and wash away the void, but not pitch black like before. The stillness in the air is refreshing, although stifled by the dust molecules that continue to circulate around me. The bulb dangling above me is starting to flicker though. With each passing minute, the basement is getting darker. I'm not sure how much longer I can stay down here. I think I'll just get some sleep for now. Nothing else I can do. When I wake up, I'll make a plan to get out of this hell. I'll update you soon. It's me again. I've not got long to write this, but I'll get everything I can down. I managed to get some shut-eye. This, however, was disturbed with a loud smash. The light has completely gone out. I woke up due to its blowing out and sending shards across the room. Luckily, none actually injured me, and I've got a sharp piece ready next to my right thigh. At least now I had something to protect myself with other than the bureau I'm currently using to write. Rex awoke from his slumber thanks to it too. He's not moved, but I can feel him staring through me. With each passing second, he seems to move, but when I close my eyes, he's right back to the same spot. I still can't focus on him completely, no matter how hard I try. It wasn't until he seemed to lower his head that I noticed the intruders to the left of him. 2 figures slumped up against the wall. They're not really moving either. They're both contorted awkwardly, husky breathing following suit. The trio are just sat directly across from me. Even as I write this, I doubt you'll be able to read it with my quivering body, trying to stay as still as possible. The footsteps have found their way to the door under the stairs, and since then they've been pounding at it constantly. The box is tumbling down the stairs as the hits get stronger. The door, weaker. Clearer voices coming through now.
Let us in.
No distortion this time. It's definitely a male's voice. He's laughing at me too. I've got no way out. Food will be meaningless if I'm stuck in the basement, and the prospect of trying to run doesn't give me a glimmer of hope. I think it's time to let go. I've lost. I'm going to sit with the others now. There's a slot for me to fit in between Rex and the others. Maybe it won't be that bad. Whoever finds this, just know I tried to fight it as long as I could. I hope this is a testament to that. This battle is with something way above me, way above you, something way above us all. I'd rather let myself go than be taken away by the thing upstairs. Goodbye. Hi, my name's Tim. I'm not relevant to this story, but I just moved into my dream home, and after hearing scurrying coming from the cellar, I stumbled upon this notepad. I managed to buy this place far cheaper than market value, and I think that'll help explain the madness that this poor soul went through. You see, when I was inquiring about the property, I asked why it was going for so cheap. Apparently, the previous owner was a paranoid schizophrenic and stopped taking his medication. He hadn't left his house for over a month. Missing work too, so his manager went to check up on him a few times. After a few weeks of nothing and still seeing his house boarded up, he decided to call the police. They found him in his basement, slumped against the wall. He had slit his wrist and cut out his eyes using a shard of glass. There wasn't anyone else there. No signs of break-in. Just 3 black stains lined up against the wall next to him. I asked about the dog too, but nothing was ever found to suggest he ever had one. There was never any storm of the century here either. I'm sorry I couldn't give you much closure on this, but I felt it was right to share his story. Seemed to be his dying wish. Whether what he saw happened or not, my guess is as good as yours. All I can say is there's definitely something making noises in this basement. Probably just rats.
Chilling tales for dark nights.